What do you look for in a crime fiction festival? Bestsellers? Prize winners? A new favourite crime writer? At Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival in spring 2023, we'll be offering all of these. But much, much more will be available. Because the home of our festival is Aberystwyth, a little town with a long history and a big heart. Once home to Welsh princes, Aberystwyth is now home to the National Library of Wales and Aberystwyth University. The sweep of the town's Regency seafront pulls the tourists in from around the globe. Aberystwyth even offers the chance to watch dolphins as well as crime writers. Festival goers will be able to enjoy gourmet food and drink, as well as delectable discussions of murder, mystery and mayhem. You'll find live music in warm, welcoming pubs, as well as lively discussions on our festival stage in a former music hall theatre, with plenty of authors around for lively discussions of your own. Come and get cosy with the crime. There are hidden alleys and ancient byways to explore where murders might quite easily be hidden, and a funicular railway to take you to the top of Constitution Hill, where you can enjoy the Camera Obscura. And if you stay for a few days after the festival, you will be able to enjoy the breathtaking scenery of Ceredigion. The countryside and coast can be viewed by boat or heritage train, on foot and two wheels as well as four. Whether you love exploring lush river valleys, walking unspoiled beaches, or discovering the history of this beautiful area, Aberystwyth and Ceredigion have so much to offer. So come to Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival next spring. You might just discover your new favourite crime writer, as well as your new favourite town.
Everyone, and welcome to this Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival event. I'm Kath Stansfield and I'm delighted to be chairing tonight's event. This is event number 6. It's all in your head, writing psychological crime fiction. So I hope everyone's in the right place. This is what you are expecting right now on YouTube. We're delighted to have you here. Welcome, everyone. I'm lucky enough to be talking tonight to Clare Mackintosh about her fantastic work. But first, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our fantastic sponsors, Aberystwyth Town Council and Literature Wales. Thank you both for your generous financial support, which has made this festival possible. Diolch yn fawr iawn. We're very, very grateful for your support. Right, to start our event tonight, we're going to hear from a Crime Cymru writer. One of the things that the Crime Cymru Author Cooperative was set up to do was to promote Welsh writing, and it's a fantastic thing to be involved in. I feel very lucky to be part of Crime Cymru. So at the beginning of every festival event, we're running 5-minute crime close-up slots, introducing new Crime Cymru members. And those of you who have attended other festival events already this week will be familiar with this setup, I'm sure. And I'm so pleased that we're able to do the same in tonight's event as well. So this evening's crime close-up author is Ripley Hayes, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So over to you, Ripley.
Thank you, Katherine. Sorry, a bit of a technology failure, but I'm hoping all will be well. My name's Ripley Hayes, and I write mysteries set in Wales with characters that include a female process server and private investigator, a district nurse, a baker, and of course, DI Daniel Owen, who has somehow managed to find himself in 6 or 7 books, with another one along the way. And a shameless plug, all of the Daniel Owen books are on special offer during the festival, with prices starting at £0. Tonight's discussion asks whether we writers should get into our readers' heads. And I want to know the answer to that, so I shall be following the discussion with great interest. For now, I want my readers in my characters' heads, seeing things through their eyes. I love that as a reader too. Give me that escape from reality, especially at the moment. So, to Daniel, I'm going to read a little bit from the start of book 2 of the series, which is called Dark Water. The context is that Daniel is at a murder scene. He's in charge. He's been in charge for years. But today, a new boss is starting work, and Daniel's not a bit happy about that. And he's particularly not happy that his new boss is, in fact, his ex-boyfriend. So, dark water. The smell came from an oversized orange wheelie bin, scuffed and muddy, standing alone in the station, on the station platform. Hang on a sec. The bin was the only sign that anybody had been there since the last train pulled out half a century ago. A dangerous-looking cast-iron bridge arched over where the tracks should have been, rusting barbed wire and mildewed signs preventing anyone climbing the steps. Moss, brambles and nettles colonised the platforms and filled the space between them. Everything dripped with moisture. Melin Tuath was a pretty town, but even the prettiest towns have ugly corners. Morning, boss. Sergeant Bethan Davis looked green around the gills, but she'd managed to mark off a single route to the bin. It's very bad, she said. Daniel looked inside. He saw a man's head covered in short hair, the same light colour as his own. The head was bent over, showing half a nose and an ear, a shoulder clad in a red t-shirt, and soft blonde hairs on the man's neck. Everything else was in shadow. It all stank of rotting rubbish and decomposing flesh, and Daniel couldn't bear the idea of the dead man, shut in that horrible space. He looked at Bethan and echoed her words. Jesus, it is very bad. Bethan gave instructions for a tent to protect the scene, for lights, for uniforms to start asking for witnesses, for crime scene investigators, and around Daniel, people started to move in response. He felt himself at the centre of the levers and cogs of the investigation, the fulcrum around which it all spun. Then Bethan spoke again. Boss, he's here. Daniel started to sweat inside his paper suit, and he knew that he had to move before his blood pressure dropped and the dizziness began, the curse of a tall, thin man standing still for too long. He turned away, still running through his mental list of things to do on the discovery of a dead body in suspicious circumstances, looked up and saw that he was being watched. He thought the watcher looked like a film star from the days of the matinee idol. Tyrone Power, perhaps, with a touch of the young Richard Burton. Hair shaved at the sides, thick and wavy on top. Eyes such a dark brown they were almost black. A very handsome man, whose expression said he was having second thoughts about his new job. Good morning, sir, said Daniel. You should know that not everyone gets a dead body on their first day working for Clwyd Police. He ran through his list of actions. Daniel, the dark-eyed man said, this isn't what I wanted. It's not what I wanted either, Daniel said, but it seems to be what we've got. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Over to Katherine.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much, Ripley Hayes, for that fantastic reading and introduction to your work to start our evening. It was wonderful to hear you, and I would urge all our audience members to check out Ripley's novels. It sounds like this is just the time to do it, as there might be some bargains there for you. So thank you very much, Ripley. That was great. So now I'm going to introduce our featured writer. But before I do, a quick reminder that we want to hear from you, our audience tonight. We're going to have time at the close of our discussion for audience questions. So do post them in the YouTube comments while Claire and I are talking this evening. Crime Cymru's co-chair, Louise Mumford, will be keeping track of them, as she has done so brilliantly all week already. And Louise will join us on Zoom towards the end of our event, and she will share your questions on your behalf. So do type in the comments as things occur to you that you'd like to ask Claire. Now is your chance. Okay. So I'm now going to introduce our featured writer this evening, Clare Mackintosh. Welcome, Claire. Come in, Claire. Hooray! That's great. Hello, Claire. Lovely to have you here. I'm going to share your biography with our audience tonight. I'm sure for many of our audience members, you'll need no introduction, but it's important to remind everyone just how amazing your books are and how well they've done and how blooming lucky we are that you're with us tonight. So brace yourselves, everyone, for this amazing bio. Clare Mackintosh is the multi-award winning author of 5 Sunday Times best-selling novels, including I Let You Go, which I know many who are here tonight will have read and loved. And this was the fastest selling debut thriller in the year it was released. Translated into 40 languages, Clare's books have sold more than 2 million copies worldwide and have been New York Times and international bestsellers and have spent a combined total of 64 weeks. That's 64 weeks in the Sunday Times bestseller chart. Clare spent 12 years in the police force, including time on CID and as a public order commander. She left the police in 2011 to work as a freelance journalist and social media consultant, and she is the founder of the Chipping Norton Literary Festival. Clare now writes full-time and lives in Wales with her husband and their 3 children. And she was also a judge for the Crime Cymru First Novel Prize. And we're announcing the winners tomorrow. So it's extremely exciting time for the prize. And we're very grateful, Clare, to your time in supporting our prize as a judge. So thank you very much for that. Welcome. Wonderful to have you. Do unmute. Oh, Clare, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, what I said was, diolch yn fawr iawn am y croeso.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you. We're going to talk tonight about all your work, but also we're going to talk particularly about The Last Party, and I'm sure everyone can see that beautiful cover just behind you there of your new novel. So this is going to be published in August, and I'm extremely lucky to have had an advance copy to read, and it's utterly brilliant. So congratulations on what I'm sure is going to be another hugely successful novel. And very interestingly, The Last Party is the first novel in a planned series, and this is your first crime series, and I think that that's a really interesting move in terms of crime fiction. So I'm keen to ask you about this change at this point and what attracts you to a series, and also series characters as well, because we're thinking tonight about the psychology of characters, the psychology of getting into our readers' heads. So I'm intrigued to think about that idea of hanging on longer with some of your characters and what might happen to them. But perhaps we'll come back to that in a little bit. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your new novel to get us started.
I can, thank you. So this is the first event I've done about The Last Party, which because it's not out yet, and normally one doesn't do events about books that aren't out. So it means I'm not practiced. So normally I've sort of done dozens and dozens of events and I, reel it off pat. So this is quite nice. It's like a bit of a rehearsal for me. So The Last Party is a crime novel, a mystery. It's set in a sort of fictionalized version of where I live, which is in Snowdonia. So it's set in a place called Cumcoed. And Cumcoed is right on the border of North Wales and England. So Cumcoed is very firmly in Wales, and the people who live there are very firmly Welsh. There's a lake just at the end of the village, and the border between England and Wales runs right through the middle of this lake, which is called Llyndrach Mirror Lake. And on the other side, the English side of the lake, there is a very beautiful sort of shishi luxury resort of wooden holiday cabins with decks stretching out over the lake. And there's a fair amount of tension between the two sides of the lake. The book starts on New Year's Day, when the locals go down to the lake to have their annual New Year's Day swim. And a body floats through the mist from the English side of the lake to the Welsh side. And that kickstarts a cross-border investigation, which is led by Detective Constable Ffion Morgan, who lives in Cumcoed, and Leo Brady, who is an English detective who works in Cheshire.
Fantastic. Well, I think you're ready to go with these book events. That was great. Super. And I'm intrigued by your point there about the setting, that it's sort of fictional. And the setting in the book is incredibly vividly realised, and it plays a huge part in the story. As you said, it is the site of the border. It's the site of a cross-border police investigation. So the idea of two police forces, two languages, two quite different cultures in many ways, because of all sorts of different reasons that perhaps we'll touch on tonight. I wondered about the choice to fictionalize the setting. If you had somewhere particular in mind, it certainly reminded me of somewhere in particular, but I wondered whether or not you started from a real place, and then what led you to change it and why.
That's very interesting. I want to know now what this place is. So I live in a place called Bala in Gwynedd, which is in North Wales. And there's a lot about the environment that I've written about that absolutely draws on my home turf. The lake isn't the fictional lake isn't the same shape and size as the lake that I swim in here in Bala, but it's quite similar, and certainly the landscape feels very similar. I drew on Vyrnwy, which is not far from where I live, and the trees around Lake Vyrnwy are very much how I see the trees around Cwm Coed. The reason it was fictionalized from the outset is there is no lake where the border between England and Wales runs through the middle of it. That doesn't happen. And I think in general that country borders don't tend to run through bodies of water. I didn't really think too much about that, to be honest. I decided that's where I wanted it, because I feel when I swim in the lake, I feel like I don't belong to anywhere. I feel like I've left the shore, and I just sort of belong to the water. I'm sort of suspended for a moment, and I really like that feeling, and I really wanted to explore how that might work in a book setting and how it might make people feel to be able to swim across an invisible border. Every time I drive into Wales, I get that sense of crossing a border, of seeing the signs, and when you live on a border, you can cross that border a lot, quite frequently, several times a day, hopping in and out of England, in and out of Wales, and I find that really, really interesting. And because I'm not Welsh, I'm an English person. We're an English family who have moved to Wales, and I have 3 children now who go to a Welsh medium school, who are fluent in Welsh, educated through Welsh, and I am a very committed, passionate Welsh learner. The culture aspect absolutely fascinates me, and the sort of concept of small towns where people haven't moved away, where there are several generations living in one place, and how that feels, and how secrets are kept across generations. There's so much rich territory, but I had to fictionalize it, partly because what I wanted to do actually doesn't geographically exist, but also because once you set something in a real place, you risk offending people. And the last thing I want to do is offend any of the people who have made us so welcome here.
Thanks. I think that's something that lots of writers are mindful of, some more so than others, I think. And sometimes we don't realise these things until the book's out, and then it's too late, and that's awful.
Absolutely. And you know what? I think you can get away with it more in cities. So I think you can set a book in London, in Birmingham, in Chester probably, because it's so big and it hasn't got that same sort of sense of community and people holding a place together. When you start writing about small towns and villages, people are very identifiable, and I think it's intrusive.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm intrigued by that idea of your own swimming. I know you're a swimmer, an outdoor swimmer, and your lake swimming, and that idea of being sort of suspended and being between places. And I wonder if do you feel that there's an analogy there with being a writer sometimes, in terms of, we often talk about writers being outsiders, that outsider voice and looking in, and writers often like to think of themselves as outsiders somehow. And I wonder if it's because it's interesting that there are, we'll probably, I'm sure, come on to this in terms of the structure of the book, the use of different points of view. We spend time with lots of different characters and we learn lots of different stories. And although there is the border and there's England and Wales and there's all sorts of divisions here, the book moves constantly between these two places, and even between Cumcoed and the new development, the shore as well. It is really fluid in a kind of literal way. And I just wonder if, is there something in terms of your own positioning in this story and what you wanted to say about the border and about some of the other things that happen in the novel? Are you sort of floating, where am I going with this? It's this very writery question, isn't it? It's going nowhere. But when you're moving between all these things in the novel, is that sort of what you're doing when you're swimming as well? You're kind of everywhere and nowhere, if you see what I mean.
I guess so. Yeah, I think it comes back to this sort of feeling of not belonging anywhere but the water, and the water, you know, swimming in water, feeling. Obviously swimming in water, you don't swim in anything else, but swimming, that, you know, water is water, and it's the same whatever country you're in. You know, it might be colder, it might be clearer, but it's water, that you're doing the same process, the same thing that you do. You know, I swam 2 weeks ago in a fjord in Oslo, and it felt like my lake back here. And so the water feels otherworldly. It feels like it doesn't belong to a country. It feels like neutral. You know, it's Switzerland. It's a liquid Switzerland.
I love that. Are you happy to give us a little reading of the opening, because it gives us such an atmospheric sense of the setting and the impact that it has on these characters? So I'm sure everyone would love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I will read from the prologue, which takes place on New Year's Day. No one in Cumcoed can remember what year the swim began, but they know they wouldn't welcome the new year in any other way. They don't remember which year it was that Davith Lewis went in wearing nothing but a Santa hat, or when the rugby lads bombed off the jetty and drenched poor Mrs. Williams. But everyone will remember today's swim. There's been snow on the peaks since before Christmas, and even with the protection from the mountains, the temperature in the town hasn't climbed above 7 degrees. The lake itself is even colder. 4 degrees, people gasp, at once gleeful and incredulous. We must be mad. As if rebelling against the clear skies, wisps of mist curl above the surface of the water, their reflection giving the disorientating impression that the sky has been tipped upside down. Above the mist, the air is a vivid blue, an echo of last night's moon suspended above the forest. From the very top of Penydraig Mountain, Llindrych seems more river than lake. It's long and serpent-shaped, each bend a flick of the dragon's tail it's said to represent. Drych means mirror, and when the wind drops and the water lies still, the surface shimmers like silver. The reflection of the mountains stretches into the centre of the lake, so solid you feel you could step onto it, no hint of the black and fathomless depths beneath. Around the edge of the lake, pine trees stand sentry, their shoulders so close that if one were felled, you could imagine them all toppling one after another. The trees steal the view from the village of Cumcoed, but they take the worst of the weather too, which feels like a fair exchange to the people who live there. On the far side of the water, a line of buildings squats in the foothills. The trees directly in front of them have been ripped from the ground, the wood used to clad the lodges and make the vast carved sign that stands at the end of the long private drive, each letter as tall as a man, the shore. There are 5 of them so far, 2-story rectangular boxes with timber-clad roofs and decks thrusting forward. Metal ladders glint in the winter sun, the pontoons bereft of the boats that tug at their ropes in summer. Luxury lakeside lodges, the glossy brochure calls them. Caravan, I fancy, Fion's mam says. Fancy caravans, airs and graces, a bloody eyesore, most of the villagers agree. Splinters of ice cluster in the shallow puddles on the lakeshore, cracked by toes freed from fur-lined boots. Ready? as I'll ever be. Coats and robes are cast aside, towels draped over waiting arms, and hot water bottles readied for the return. There's a rush for the shore, a tangle of white limbs and bathing suits, brave bikinis and judicious woolly hats, an excited chatter. They let out a whoop and a blithe and now itha as they run towards the lake, screaming as they reach the icy water. When they're deep enough, they plunge, mind over matter through the low-lying mist. Cold clamps of vice around their chests, mouths opening in shock as their breath is wrenched away. Keep moving, cry the veterans. As the mist begins to clear, a woman cries out. It stands out among the screams of excitement, sending shivers of a different kind down the backs of those waiting on the shore. The rescue boat dips its oars into the water, in and out, making its way towards the commotion. Out of the mist floats a man, face down and quite unmistakably dead.
Wonderful, thank you so much. It's so atmospheric, and the thing that really spoke to me when I was starting the book, and then as I made my way through the story, you can see how it frames everything that follows that opening, that idea of the stillness of what's on the surface, and then all these dark things that are hidden beneath. And as you say, this is a community where there are lots of secrets, lots of things that seem buried, but actually they're rising to the surface. They're coming up through the mirror surface. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your detective duo, Fionn and Leo, and how you came to them as characters. And we're thinking tonight about kind of psychological crime fiction and getting in the heads of our readers and characters, and kind of where they came from, what you discovered about them in writing them.
And I honestly don't know where they came from. And I always do. I always know sort of what the genesis was for my characters, because normally the story comes first. So normally with my standalone psychological thrillers, a twist, it's been a twist I've wanted to pull off, or a particular concept I've wanted to explore. And The Last Party was different. The Last Party was Fionn, as she is now in the book. She's a 30-something, quite spiky, quite acerbic, doesn't suffer fools gladly, female detective who is sort of simultaneously addicted to her environment and resentful of it. You know, she wants to leave, but actually she's left before and she's come back. And she has this love-hate relationship with the small town, a small town where you can't shake off your past. And, you know, this is something that everyone who's stayed in their hometown will know, that, or even when you go back to your family, that they treat you like you were when you were younger, because that's the history that you have, you know. Or if you meet up with old school friends, you sort of regress a little bit because that's your environment. And so Fionn has carried around the moniker of Gwyllt, so Wild Fionn was her nickname at school and sort of growing up. And she sort of, you know, lived up to that. And for various reasons, things went wrong in her life. But she's still known as Fionn Gwyllt to all the people in the town, which is really frustrating for her because she's moved on. She's a lot older and wiser now. So that's her, and she just arrived like that. And the setting is what prompted the book. So I organised the New Year's Day swim here in my hometown, and it's pretty much as I describe in the book. And one of the weather conditions I love the most about the lake is when the mist is sitting on the surface of the water, and so you can't see the water. You're sort of swimming through mist. It's the most magical and slightly eerie way to swim. And we swam like that one New Year's Day. And because I'm a crime writer and an ex-police officer, instead of thinking, "Oh, Happy New Year, everyone," I was secretly thinking, what if a body floated through the mist towards us? You know, there's all these people in the water, and I could just see it. I could see the hysteria and the screaming and the splashing and the kind of tangle of limbs. that's all I had was the setting. And the more I thought about it, the more I became obsessed, I suppose, with this idea of reflections in the water, of what you see above the water isn't necessarily what's below, that what is on one side of the lake, i.e. Wales, is not what's on the other, England. And that meant that Fionn needed to have an opposite. She needed to have someone who was a reflection of her, i.e. another detective, and yet was very, very different. And you know what, I've actually only just sort of realized that is what I was doing. Amazing when you start talking about a book and you sort of think, oh yes, of course, that's why I did that. And Leo is pretty much as opposite to Fionn as you could get. You know, she is female, he is male, she's white, he's black, she's Welsh, he's English. She is chaotic and a bit of a loose cannon. She's unpredictable, she's spontaneous, she's thoughtless. He is measured and cautious and quiet and sort of considered, and they meet and they are forced to work together, and I adore them as a duo. They work really well together, and it was when they started working together that I said to my editor, I think I might be writing a series. So I didn't know that, you know, I didn't set out to write a series. I didn't say, oh, I know what will work now. It was simply that the world can be explored more. You know, I always said I won't write a series unless I find a character who has more stories to tell and that I think people will want to come back to again and again, and B, that I have a world that merits further visits. And as soon as Fionn and Leo started working together and they started sort of exploring the world that I'd put them in, I thought, yeah, this should be a series. I would like to make this a series.
It's interesting, isn't it, that perhaps you felt that connection with the characters and that they had that potential afterlife, given that this book started in a different way, you know, that it didn't necessarily start with the story idea and with the twist and that the kind of concept driven. And I wonder if there's something in that you started with the place, that incredible moment of swimming and thinking about a corpse disrupting the swim. And I think that's probably the way how you visualize it is why it comes through so vividly in the start. I was utterly convinced that perhaps you had dealt with this in one of your former lives, because it is, you know, I was like, oh God, I can see it. So I think that it's an interesting idea that you know, that you've started with the place and this moment in the place, and then Fionn has come from this landscape, and then she's more present, perhaps she's got more life, and then she gives rise to Leo, and then it becomes this whole other thing. I think that's really fascinating. I wonder now that obviously you're writing the series, how are you finding it? Because I'm presuming you're working or have finished on the second already. Is that right? Should I ask? I don't. How's it going?
It's awful.
Oh dear. Okay.
It's no, okay, awful's not the right word. I think, well, firstly, I've struggled to write anyway, as many writers have. Some writers really thrived in lockdown and others really struggled, and I was one of the ones who struggled. And, you know, it's a first world problem. I'm acutely conscious of how lucky I am to have a job that has been relatively unaffected by the pandemic. But I found it very difficult, and I haven't really got that back. So there's that. And writing a series is very different to writing a standalone. So you can't change your mind about what you're writing.
No.
This is it, you know, you're writing book 2. I keep thinking, I might put a town there. I might have them go to a town, you know, just down the road. I can't do that because I've set the geography. I've been quite clear that there's, you know, nothing around for however many miles. I've got my mountain, the mountain's not moving, the lake's not moving. So that is just different. It's, you know, it's not easier, harder. There's a lot to be said for writing a book without needing to create a new world. So I do have to introduce new characters. I have to think about how many of the existing characters do I want to sort of feature, and if I'm not featuring them, how much do I mention them? I need to think about how much I can give away of events that happened in book one. So, for example, I'm finding it a little bit like writing a thriller in reverse. So, if when I'm writing a thriller, I've got a big twist at the end of a book, then I'm hiding that twist for the whole of the novel. What I'm finding now is in book two, I'm having to hide a twist that I'd used in book one, and yet the characters all need to sort of refer to it as though it's normal, because they, for them, that's something they've lived through. But for the reader who's read book one knows it. But what about the reader that just picks up book two, who needs to be able to read that as a standalone, and then might want to go and read book one? So I can't give anything away. So it's, not only am I having to keep the secrets of book two, but I'm having to keep the secrets of book one as well. And that I had not really bargained for or thought through. And I'm finding it quite hard.
And I have to break it to you, that only gets worse if you write book 3, book 4, book 5, because it's like this snowball effect and you carry it all along with you. But I'm sure you're very much up to the challenge. Thinking about that idea of hiding things and hiding twists and what the characters know and what they don't know. I'm keen to ask you a bit about the structure of this book, The Last Party, because I think that there are comparisons made with a kind of Agatha Christie type of structure, and I think that that's really apt. And it struck me that the book is like a kind of cross between like a contemporary police procedural. You've got police officers, they do police work, they're in incident rooms, they go and see a pathologist, things that we'd recognise from police procedurals. And I do love the pathologist. I hope Izzy Weaver is returning, I trust. Good, okay, that's great. So you've got kind of police procedural things that we'll recognise, and then you kind of mix it with like a country house type scenario where you've got a limited pool of suspects. They're all kind of connected by the same location, but they all have very different relationships with that place. So with the Shore, for instance, which is this sort of super swanky lakeside development, you have to have quite a bit of cash to be there, but not everybody does. And that's quite a big issue, kind of money and lack thereof is really important to the plot. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of mashup of different kinds of crime. And we follow Fionn and Leo, we see their points of view, but then as the story unfolds, we also spend time with all the other players as well, which is quite sort of Christie-esque. And I wondered if you could say a bit about how you structured the book, because I think it's incredibly accomplished and works really well, and I'm just fascinated by it.
Well, thank you very much. I wrote it 3 times, I think, before I got the structure right, and I knew it wasn't right from the beginning. So what I had initially was a fairly sort of standard crime structure of, here is the present day timeline, i.e. the police investigation, starting from the discovery of the body right up until the end of the book. And then that was alternated with what happened before the murder. And that's a fairly conventional way to tell a crime story. And I don't really do convention. So if you've read my previous novels, they're generally, they have a structural kind of just something unusual about the structure, whether it's the twist or whatever. Not all of them, but most of them. And I just couldn't get it right. And then I was thinking about water again. I was thinking about that feeling of diving into water and going down and down and down and then coming up again, and the contrast between the two. And I was talking to a friend of mine about poetry, and we were talking about palindromic poetry, where you can, you read the poem one way, and then you read it from top to bottom and it has one meaning, and then you read from bottom to top and it has another meaning. And it's very clever. It's very hard to write. I wrote a palindromic poem for this book.
Great.
Which was originally going to be in the center of the book. And then I lost confidence in it, so I took it out. But so I read some palindromic poems, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to write a palindromic novel. So the investigative chapters stay the same. They're still, from when the body's discovered until the end of the book. But the past timeline starts the night of the party. So it starts New Year's Eve. It starts with the murder, actually. And it goes backwards. And it goes backwards right to the middle of the book, when it starts going forwards again. And we see the same scenes that we saw in the first half of the book, but from someone else's perspective. So what we thought, so we're back to this reflections, the same but different. What we thought was the truth in the first half of the book, actually we now see is something else. So something else is revealed, or someone we thought was talking actually was someone else. So they're mirrored. It's a mirror book, and of course the lake is called Mirror Lake. So I'm all about the imagery and the metaphors. So that's how the structure came to be. And what that also enabled me to do was to hold back some reveals, because if I had just gone backwards, it would have been, which I did consider at one point, it was difficult to maintain the tension, because at what point do you reveal the murderer? And whereas actually by going backwards and then forwards, and by using this palindromic reflective structure, it meant that I could play with time and play with what the reader knew.
My cat has just at this moment decided to arrive on my lap here and sit on my microphone lead, so apologies for that. I think the relationship between crime fiction and poetry is really fascinating. And actually there's the Venn diagram of poets who also write crime novels is actually quite considerable. So I think that idea of the form, of poetic form, and the form of a crime novel, there's a really fruitful kind of conversation to be had about those things, really. And I wonder, did this novel sort of bring you to poetry, or are you a poetry reader generally?
No, I'm not. So I'm sort of embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to say it because I'm sure I'm not alone. I don't really understand poetry. I don't know, there are things that I like and there are things I don't like. And I don't know if I'm supposed to like the things that I like. And I write the occasional poem, and I don't even know if it is a poem, and I don't know if it's good, and I don't know if it, I don't know where I am with it. I understand story. I understand form and language and tension and pace and character and setting. I don't understand poetry, either to write it or to read it. So did it bring me to, I tell you what, actually what brought me to poetry in sort of more recent years was being a judge for the Costa Book Awards, which I loved so much. So I was one of the judges for the first novel award, first novel award. And we read lots and lots of different genres, and lots of poetry and sci-fi, and lots of things that I don't normally read. And actually, I read a lot of poetry during that, and have carried on reading bits and pieces. But as I said, I don't know what I'm doing with poetry.
I mean, I'm a poet, and I mostly feel like that most of the time, to be honest, Claire. So I think that idea of some things you like and some things you don't. We feel that with fiction too, and I think it's a helpful response to think about with poetry. But I think that idea of, it's funny because I think that the way you talk about form and visualize form and think about constraints, that's a very kind of poetic thing to think about. Actually, if you think you're almost like a sonnet writer, but in a crime novel form, and that's fantastic. I'm conscious of time, and I have no doubt that there will have been lots of questions in our YouTube chat. So I'm wondering if I could ask Louise Mumford, perhaps like magic, to reveal herself, to arrive. And Louise, hello.
Like magic.
Like magic. It is like magic. I'm wondering if you have some questions for Claire.
We're all very impressed with the palindromic novel. We're all wildly impressed in the chat room. I'm a bit scared now, frankly, as well.
I should point out, I have never ever, well, firstly, I've never talked about this. So I'm sort of feeling my way a bit and feeling like a bit of an arse. a bit up myself. But it wasn't, I didn't sort of sit there and go, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to create the palindromic crime novel. It was kind of feeling my way and going, oh, that, I'm going to try that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've had lots of questions. This has been a fascinating chat, and it sparked lots of different things in the chat room. So the first one, which I want to go to, which is a lovely one, just to get us started off, this is from Donna. And it's, have any of your characters scared you when you've been writing them? Have they actually perturbed you in any way?
Only my baddie in I Let You Go. And I think that was mostly because it is really horrible, and he was talking directly to the reader, and so I was sort of channeling him. And with that book, it was my debut, and I was writing around freelance work and around kids, and so I wrote his sections late at night when everyone was asleep, and I used to write them with my eyes shut in a dark room and just sort of touch type. I used to just sort of channel him and think of all the people like him who I'd met as a police officer. And so it very much felt like he was in the room with me. And I remember one day my husband was on nights. He was a police officer and he was working on nights, and I was at home with the kids, and I was absolutely in this horrible world and feeling quite jittery. And then there was a creak outside my door, and my son was sleepwalking and stood in the doorway like he was 4 or 5, and I absolutely leapt off my chair. It was horrific. But otherwise, no, my characters don't scare me.
Another question which has come up, which you did kind of touch on, but I wanted to give you a little bit more of a chance to talk about it in a bit more detail, is the way your characters arrive. So do they always arrive fully formed, as you talked about? Or do you have to work more sometimes to develop them?
Definitely have to work more. I honestly, Fionn is the only character that has just been who she is from the outset. And right now, actually, Fionn is working with somebody else. So she and Leo are working together, but there's someone else as well that she's working with. And as it stands, she's really cardboard cut out. Like she's not real. I don't really care about her. The reader certainly isn't going to care about her. And so my job now is to stop writing her and go away and work out who she is, where she's been for the last 36 years, and what's in her fridge and what she does on her days off and all those sorts of things, so that when I come back to her and start writing her again, she's as real as Fionn is.
That question was from Sophie, which I forgot to say then. Sorry, Sophie, should have said that.
Good question, Sophie.
Also, another good question that came in is thinking more about your time in the police force. How is moving to a more rural part of Wales been different to your career in the police? What have you found as the differences with your new life?
Well, it's so there isn't really isn't a sort of comparison between the two, because I had left the police. So I worked in the police both in urban and rural areas, and in areas not dissimilar to where Fionn works, where you've got a huge area to cover, you've got no backup, you use what we always used to refer to as the Ways and Means Act, where you just have to make things work, because actually if you nick everyone on a Friday night, then that's no coppers on the streets for the rest of the night. So I understand what that's like. My life now is so very different because I'm not a police officer. So I think even before I'd moved here, it was a world apart. But my police career has had such a huge influence on what I write, and really not remotely to do with writing crime or procedurals or taking stories from real life or anything like that. What it's done is it gave me exposure to lots of people from different walks of life, and gave me a level of empathy that perhaps I wouldn't have had without that. more than anything, it showed me how narrow the line is between a safe life and an unsafe life, between good choices and poor choices. And it just showed me that, bad things can happen to anyone, and anyone can do bad things. I like to explore that grey area because it's something I've seen in real life. And then finally, and I've made this, I've sort of explained this before in other events, so sorry if this is a repeat, but being a police officer is, and particularly being a detective, is being a storyteller. So you are finding the narrative in lots of different people and in lots of different settings. So you're finding the story that a crime scene has to tell you, and you're finding the story from the CCTV cameras, and you're listening to a dozen witnesses' statements and working out who your reliable narrators are, and who can't be trusted. And you're pulling together that story and weaving together the subplots and the central characters and the secondary characters, and working out what's happening, and then presenting the file, the court file, to an audience, to a judge, a jury, a magistrate. And that is a very, very similar process to writing any novel, particularly a crime novel. It's just that my audience now are readers and my topic is fictional.
That is a fantastic way of thinking about how a police officer works. I've never thought of it like that. So yeah, that is just an amazing way to describe it. And I'm rubbish again at saying whose question that was. That was Alex's question. Sorry, Alex, they're going to kill me in the chat room if I don't actually say who their names are. I've got a question from Jim. I've remembered Jim's name now. And this one is about psychology. So you're writing psychological fiction. How interested are you in reading up on psychology practices, and especially some of the ways in which some elements of psychology can perhaps be overlooked in terms of cases? So basically, how much research do you put into the psychology side?
I don't read psychology books at all. Very occasionally I might read something like that. I read a brilliant book about being a sociopath. I can't remember what it's called now. I want to say How to Be a Sociopath, but that's probably not what it's called. So I'll read about particular topics, but really not very much, because I'm wary of accidentally giving someone a condition, labeling someone and reproducing kind of pop psychology, I suppose, which isn't my bag. I feel like I know people quite well from jobs that I've had. And so I prefer to just think about who those people are and how they work as individuals, rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to have a narcissist. What does that, what is that person going to be like? I just think, oh, here's this person, and actually they've got this tendency, and not really think too deeply about it. So sorry, that might be a disappointing answer, and I should have said yes, and I'm studying for a master's in psychology, but I'm not. I
think if you've worked in the police force, you pretty much have got a master's in psychology by that point. I just think you haven't been perhaps tested on it. Gemma asks, were you a fan of the genre of psychological fiction before you started writing?
Yeah, well, I was a massive fan of crime and really grew up on crime from, I reckon the first crime novels I read were Famous Five and Secret Seven, which are absolutely crime novels for children, obviously, and then moved on to Agatha Christie and Ruth Rendell, Daphne du Maurier. And so there are definite sort of psychological angles in those crime novels. I think I learned fairly early on that I was more interested in those psychological crime novels than the action, hard nut detective novels. And then when I joined the police, I stopped reading British crime because it annoyed me so much. I couldn't handle the inaccuracies in it. It's got an awful lot better for lots of reasons, mainly because people do more research, and research is easier to do now than it was 20 years ago. So I started reading American crime because it could have been just as wrong, but I wouldn't know about it. So I was a layman. So I read a lot of Karen Slaughter and Patricia Cornwell, lots and lots of Patricia Cornwell. And Patricia Cornwell has just quoted on The Last Party. So just read The Last Party and said something nice about it.
Oh, congratulations.
I feel like I can retire now. This is, the pinnacle of my career. So lots of American crime, which I really enjoyed. And then what happened was I wanted to write I Let You Go, and I knew there was a crime in it, but I was really struggling with the fact that I wanted to tell this from a woman's perspective, from what used to be called the woman in peril. So I wanted to center her, I wanted to have first person, I wanted to be inside her head, and that didn't fit with what I knew as crime. And you have to bear in mind, this was 2011. That I was writing it. And so there really wasn't the sort of the big swell of domestic suspense that we've had in more recent years. And then I read Little Face by Sophie Hannah. And I hadn't read any Sophie Hannah before. And there was a crime novel that was written from two points of view. It was written with police procedure in it, an investigative strand with the Culver Valley detectives, but we also had the inside the head of the woman in peril. And that was it. And so Sophie really was responsible for the way that I then tackled I Let You Go and my entry into the crime world as a psychological thriller writer.
And Sophie Hannah is also a poet, just to put that out there. So that's clearly...
Maybe I might secretly be a poet and not actually be aware of it yet.
Yes, I think so. Congratulations.
One, which is quite a fun question from, well, it's not a fun question if you actually are scared of this, but Louise asks, does writing Hostage make you scared of flying, or were you originally scared of flying?
No, it's so if you've not come across it before, Hostage is a thriller set on an aeroplane, a long-haul 20-hour flight from London to Sydney. No, because I love flying and I missed it desperately during the pandemic, and so it just made me miss it even more. I'm quite pragmatic about these things. I don't actually think I'm going to be in a hostage situation. Damn it, now that I've said that, I am, aren't I? Touch wood and all of that, fingers crossed. So no, I was just desperate to get on a plane again.
Thank you. They've been brilliant answers. We've had lots of lovely comments about your books and people saying how much they've enjoyed them. And I will now duck back out to let Katherine finish off the panel. Thank you for your lovely answers.
Oh, thank you, Question Master. And I wanted to say as well, I hope it's all right to say this, that because The Last Party obviously isn't out yet, and so we've sort of been talking about a book that you can't buy, but you can pre-order it. And pre-orders are so hugely important for authors because they all go into the first week's sales, and the first week is the most important week for anyone who's desperately hoping to find their way into the top 10 of the book charts. And so if you did think you might want to read this book, then something that I do is I work with my local bookshop, who's called Awen Merian here in Bala, and I sign and personalise those books, so you get a nice message in it and you get a beautiful hardback, and it's posted to you, so it's ready on publication day. So if that is something you felt you would like to do, you would make my day and you'd make a Gwyn at Awen Merian's day. And there is an order form on my website. So if you go to claremackintosh.com, you'll find that form under signed books, and he posts all over the world. So I would love to write a message to you in a copy of The Last Party.
Thank you very much for letting everyone know, Claire. That's so important. And I would urge everybody to order the book. It's one of the most deftly put together crime novels I've read in absolutely ages. I think it's just beautifully conceived. And I was so relieved that it is a series, and that we're going to spend more time in this world with these characters, because I found it very gripping, but also really moving as a story. And it was incredibly rich. So congratulations, Claire, on a winner. I'm sure it was great. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Claire. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to everyone at home, wherever you are, for joining us. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you so much for supporting the Gwyl Crime Cymru Festival. Thank you to Louise, our question wrangler. Thank you to Ripley Hayes for starting us off with such a fantastic reading. And thank you to our tech gurus behind the scenes, who you can't see, but who are essential. We're really grateful. So thank you for steering us through so safely. And that's it for us this evening.